adjustment layers you're going to find are extremely helpful in really a lot of those final stages of developing your compositions. And at the moment, though, what I'm starting with here is this is really a stock photo of some people standing around that I found on the internet. But this is going to be helpful for me in just illustrating and demonstrating a bit of what adjustment layers can do. So to access the adjustment layers, most frequently you're going to go down here to the lower right of Photoshop itself. You see the cursor, there's this half filled circle. If you left click on that, the adjustment layer menu will pop up here. And let's start at the top with solid color. And you'll see what it meant, what it said, right? It gave us a solid color. It's starting here in black, but what you can do is in this color picker, you can choose any one of the, I think it's almost 3 million colors that you can choose from a range of blues and greens and you name it, it's here, okay? So let's say we settled on this green tone and it's filling everything up. Now we can't see any of our figures, but what's useful about this, well, one thing that would be useful for this, if we put it behind all of our figures, now we have a new backdrop for our figures, right? But if we kept it up at the top, but we changed the opacity of it to say 53%, we get this effect, which could be useful depending on what you're working on, right? You want to push down some color. Using a color fill like this could be really helpful in your composition. Likewise, you can also, I'm scrolling through layer styles. You see what each layer style does to this green color fill adjustment layer. Okay, continuing our look at adjustment layers in Photoshop. We're going to move ahead to another one that I frequently use, and that is curves. And you'll find that curves gives you a dynamic similar to using brightness and contrast. In fact, I would pretty much argue that you could get almost the same result by using brightness and contrast as you do with curves, but I like the way that curves lets you grab this literal curve you see in this box, and you can really start to play with this and push and pull and really start to get some interesting dynamics. And as with everything, some things look better than others, but curves is an interesting way to really bring a lot of elements of your composition together and do something quite interesting. Let's move on to another one. I don't use exposure, vibrance. Another frequently used one, though, is hue and saturation. If I scroll across this bar in hues, you'll see it's really starting to drastically, in some cases, change and manipulate the colors of these people standing here. And saturation does what it says. If I go to the right here, all the colors of these figures are starting to get really punched up. And likewise, if I go to the left, I'm getting to a grayscale, frankly. I use hue and saturation quite a bit. And let's not forget that you can turn an adjustment layer into a clipping mask. And if clipping masks seem confusing to you at the moment, be sure to check out the clipping masks video that I made. But let's turn this hue and saturation adjustment level into a clipping mask, and let's have it affect only, who did this end up being for? We'll find out in a second. It's second to the left only. You see how I'm only now affecting the figure second to the left, making her only her color really punchy and bright, or only making her gray in this case. Very useful, powerful tool. Okay, let's look at another one. Color balance. This is another one I use quite a bit. Let's move this all the way to the top of our layer stack. And what color balance does is, if you get these three lines here, and it starts to say red, green, blue, yellow, magenta, cayenne. If I start to push this to the reds, what it's telling Photoshop to do is really lean on my reds. I want to feel red in as much as you can. And likewise, if I really punch up greens, I'm saying just give me more green. If I go the other way, you see how everything starts to lean towards magenta. If I take this top one and I go towards the cayenne, you see how everything starts to feel more blue. Let's take this bottom one. You don't see too much of the yellows, but if we had a lot of yellow things happening in our image, we'd feel it that much more. Color balance, you're sort of telling Photoshop, I want to feel a lot of blue, I want to feel a lot of green, I want to feel a lot of this color or that color, or just de-emphasize another one. It's really useful in that way. Let's look at another one. Well, black and white is just a really quick way to get a black and white look to your image. It's useful though if you need to toggle between black and white and a color image. If I just turn the visibility off for this adjustment layer, it works really quickly. This is also useful though in it gives you different kinds of black and white, and what that means here is you can tell Photoshop to give me as much black as possible. You see how dark that ends up being. And likewise, there's an option to really emphasize white. So Photoshop gives you a black and white image, but kind of leaning on the white end. And there's other different kinds of filters for black and white. And really the only way to know what you get is to experiment, see what they look like when you select them. Each one's going to give you something a little different. But very useful and very interesting if you just want to see a few different options for your compositions. Gradient maps. I use gradient maps to help to really put everything on the same level, so to speak, near the end of putting a composition together. When you are creating your composition in Photoshop, you might find that the intensity of the conflicting photos and colors and layers that you're putting on top of each other, they sometimes feel like they're just not getting cohesive. It's like the images and the colors are not cooperating. It's not getting cohesive for you. Gradient map is a way to let Photoshop help you get everything on the same common denominator, so to speak, visually. Now this looks really extreme at the moment, but bear with me and let me show you a bit of what this can do. Usually with a gradient map, you want to back it down quite a bit anyway, because as you can see, if you keep it like this, this is just overwhelming the color and just the look of this. You want to back this down to about between 10 and 15. Usually something like this, like 12, like maybe 15. This looks pretty mellow. Now, this doesn't feel like this does very much, but I can assure you if this group of people standing here was taken in different kinds of sunlight in different studios, and we had this gradient map over top of it, it would really help to make this make a lot more sense.